The German tank crews of World War II often believed they had seen everything the Allies could throw at them. They had clashed with Shermans in North Africa, faced British Churchills in Italy, and engaged Soviet T-34s across the vast steppes of Russia. To many German tankers, their own armored beasts, the Panzerwaffes, the Panthers, and of course the mighty Tigers, represented an unbeatable standard of armored warfare. Their confidence was built on thick armor, powerful guns, and a doctrine of decisive tank-on-tank battles. Yet there was one machine waiting in the shadows of history, a machine so fast, so unorthodox, and so completely different from what the Germans expected that it seemed almost unbelievable when it first appeared. That machine was the American M18 Hellcat, a tank destroyer capable of reaching an astonishing 55 miles per hour on the battlefield. For German tankers used to slugging matches and heavy steel monsters, the arrival of such a vehicle was a shock unlike anything else, and many never truly understood what they were up against until it was too late. The Hellcat was not built in the image of the Tiger or the Panther. Instead, it was conceived around a single, radical principle: speed kills. The American designers who worked on it believed that no matter how thick a tank's armor was, there was always a gun that could penetrate it. They concluded that protection by armor was an illusion, because eventually someone would bring a bigger gun. So rather than burden their vehicle with tons of steel plating, they stripped it down, built it light, and gave it an engine and suspension system that turned it into the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the Second World War. When German tankers first encountered it, many of them thought it was a trick, or simply could not believe that a tracked vehicle weighing nearly 20 tons could move faster than their own trucks. The reality, however, was undeniable. The M18 Hellcat could not only keep up with advancing mechanized formations, it could outpace them entirely, flying across fields and roads at a velocity no German tank could ever dream of matching. To a German crew huddled inside a Panther, hearing reports of a new American vehicle that moved like a phantom was disorienting. The Panther was itself no slow machine by German standards. It could reach around 28 miles per hour on roads, but it was heavily armored, heavy-gunned, and designed for power. The Hellcat, by comparison, was the complete opposite. With armor barely thick enough to stop machine gun fire, it was suicidal to fight like a tank. Yet its 76mm gun was perfectly capable of piercing the sides of a Panther or Tiger at the right angle. This combination meant that while German crews expected an opponent to lumber into position, the Hellcat appeared like a ghost, racing around flanks, striking from unexpected angles, and disappearing again before German gunners could even rotate their turrets. The first time German tankers saw the Hellcat in action, many assumed it was just another Sherman variant. The silhouette was low and unfamiliar, but in the chaos of battle, most crews didn't stop to study every line of their enemy. What they noticed instead was its movement, how quickly it darted out from cover, how rapidly it repositioned, how it seemed almost reckless in the way it maneuvered across the battlefield. Crews in Tigers who were used to being the hunters suddenly found themselves under fire from directions they never expected. In Normandy, during the bitter bocage fighting, Hellcats demonstrated their ability to use narrow lanes and open fields as racetracks, racing into ambush positions and then vanishing before counterfire could lock onto them. The Germans had faced fast vehicles before, like the Soviet BT series earlier in the war, but never one with this balance of firepower and blistering speed. Reports began to filter through German ranks describing American tank destroyers that were moving faster than reconnaissance cars. Some dismissed them as exaggerations, soldiers' tales distorted in the fog of war. But soon, those stories were confirmed. By the summer of 1944, the Hellcat's speed was not just a rumor. It was a nightmare that German crews had to contend with. The American doctrine of tank destroyer battalions played directly into the Hellcat's strengths. They weren't used as brawlers or as breakthrough machines. They were deployed to lie in wait, then strike swiftly and decisively against German armored thrusts. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, for example, used its Hellcats with stunning effectiveness during the Battle of the Bulge, darting through snow-covered forests and towns, engaging German armor at ranges and angles that negated the advantage of heavier German machines. For the Germans, this was maddening. Their entire armored doctrine revolved around shock action and overwhelming force. They built their tanks as instruments of terror, with psychological dominance almost as important as mechanical superiority. A WWII rolling onto the field could silence entire Allied units, its reputation doing half the fighting before a shot was even fired. But against the Hellcat, psychological dominance failed. No matter how intimidating a German tank was, it could not match the speed of the American destroyer. A Hellcat crew that saw a Tiger did not have to stand toe-to-toe in a hopeless duel. They could relocate, find a flank, and turn the battlefield into their own hunting ground. To German tankers, it was as if the rules of armored warfare had been rewritten. The idea that a tracked vehicle could exceed 50 miles per hour was almost beyond belief for German engineers. Their tanks were marvels of engineering in their own right, but they carried the burden of heavy armor and complicated transmissions. Even their lighter vehicles, like the Panzer II or half-tracks, could not approach the speed of the Hellcat. The M18 achieved this because its designers sacrificed armor almost entirely, relying on agility instead of protection. To many German crews who later examined wrecked Hellcats, the sight of such thin armor was shocking. They wondered how any crew could willingly climb inside such a fragile machine, but they failed to appreciate that its very lightness was the secret to its lethality. The Hellcat did not need armor if it was simply too fast to hit. Combat reports from American crews revealed just how powerful this speed advantage could be. Hellcat drivers often pushed their vehicles to the limit, using terrain like race car drivers to outmaneuver heavier opponents. In one engagement, Hellcats managed to circle around German tanks, striking from multiple angles so quickly that German gunners were unable to keep up. The turrets of a Tiger or Panther, while formidable, were slow to rotate. By the time a German gunner lined up a shot, the Hellcat was gone, leaving only smoke and wreckage behind. To the Germans, this felt unnatural, as though the Americans had unleashed a machine that broke every convention of armored warfare they had learned. Even when German crews managed to land hits on Hellcats, they often discovered that destroying one did not stop the rest. Hellcats rarely fought alone. They hunted in packs. One vehicle might bait a German tank into firing, while others maneuvered to attack from the sides. The coordination and speed of these American units left German commanders frustrated and uncertain. They could not predict where the next strike would come from. An entire armored column could be stalled by a handful of Hellcats, not because they outgunned the Germans, but because they outmaneuvered them at every turn. The German propaganda machine, always eager to maintain morale, rarely admitted the problems caused by the Hellcat. Official reports downplayed its impact, focusing instead on Shermans as the primary American tank. Yet among frontline crews, whispers spread about the fast American tank destroyers that seemed to appear and vanish with ghost-like precision. To a tanker who survived such an encounter, the memory was unforgettable. Many simply never believed the numbers. To imagine a vehicle that could drive at the speed of a car while carrying a 76 mm gun defied the very idea of armored warfare as Germans understood it. By 1945, the Hellcat had carved out its legend. In Italy and France, in Belgium, and across the final push into Germany, its speed became both weapon and shield. German tankers facing the final collapse of the Reich found themselves ambushed time and again by opponents who refused to fight on German terms. The last great offensives of Hitler's war machine, including the Ardennes offensive, were blunted in part by the rapid response of Hellcat units. In towns like Bastogne, where German armor tried to break through, Hellcats arrived like lightning, plugging gaps, dashing across frozen roads, and striking at the flanks of advancing columns. For the Germans, each encounter reinforced the same unsettling truth. They had underestimated their enemy's ingenuity, and in the Hellcat, they faced a predator they could not catch. In the end, the Hellcat was not the most heavily armed or armored vehicle of the war. It was not as famous as the Sherman or as feared as the Tiger, yet its uniqueness lay in its sheer defiance of expectation. German tankers, trained to measure opponents by armor thickness and gun caliber, never accounted for speed as the ultimate weapon. They could calculate penetration tables, compare armor slopes, and study silhouettes, But no chart or manual could prepare them for a vehicle that moved at 55 miles per hour, striking and vanishing before countermeasures could be organized. The Hellcat proved that in the chaos of mechanized warfare, agility could be as deadly as brute strength. When the war ended and German crews reflected on their experiences, many admitted they never truly understood the Hellcat until after the fact. Some believed it was a rare oddity, a desperation design rushed into combat. Others dismissed its significance compared to the overwhelming tide of Allied forces. But those who had faced it firsthand, who had watched helplessly as it streaked across their sights and sent shells crashing through their armor, knew the truth. The M18 Hellcat was unlike anything else they had ever encountered. It was the embodiment of a philosophy that the Germans never embraced, that in war, sometimes the best protection is not to be hit at all. The story of the Hellcat is, in many ways, the story of how the Allies outthought as well as outfought the German war machine. By refusing to copy the German obsession with heavy armor, the Americans created a vehicle that turned the battlefield into a race the Germans could not win. To this day, historians and veterans alike remember the shock it caused. The numbers still sound improbable. 55 miles per hour, faster than any tank destroyer, faster than any tank, faster than even most armored cars of its time. But the proof lay in battle after battle, where German tankers discovered too late that their steel monsters were being hunted by a machine that simply refused to play by their rules. And so the legend remains. The American Hellcat was the fastest armored fighting vehicle of World War II, a machine that rewrote the expectations of tank warfare. German crews never believed it at first, and many never lived long enough to understand what had happened to them. But history records it clearly. While Tigers and Panthers may have embodied power, it was the Hellcat's speed that proved decisive in many battles. In the end, the Germans never knew what they were truly facing until the shells struck home. And by then, the Hellcat had already vanished into the distance, leaving nothing behind but burning wrecks and the memory of a ghost that could reach 55 miles per hour.